Welcome to the Misfits Guide to the Bible.
Where the curious, the skeptical, and the strange find a home.
I'm Jonas Worthy.
And I'm Sam Smith, and together we will embark on a journey through the Bible's wild side.
For those who don't quite fit in. Have you thought any more about the ram in the thicket?
Yeah, I've actually thought about it a lot. I've been revisiting it almost every day, and I don't have a solution to what I think it is.
Yeah.
I'm very excited. I'll be honest, I was book shopping and they had like a kid's Bible, and I was like, I should buy this for myself, but I didn't cheat.
Whenever we get to it, I'll talk a little bit about it. But I, for me personally, what I think about that piece is that it's probably something that was pretty common to that part of the world. And so
Yeah.
it found its way into this story as well. So that's what I think
So
about
what
it.
that do you think that was like a decorative piece of art, or do you think it was you know, like an icon?
I definitely think it's probably decorative, just from how ornate it looks. And
Mm.
I don't know, there's not necessarily worship that's attributed to this, as far as I can tell in this story. So I don't know, but maybe you never know.
Yeah, that makes sense. As soon as I asked it, I was like, yeah, I don't think Christians are down for that. I don't think that they have animal icons.
Well, I'm trying to think. You know, iconography is like a big divide amongst the
Mm,
Eastern and the Western Church. Eastern Church is very pro iconography, and the Western Church is very anti. So,
interesting.
yeah, it was not the reason that the church is split, but it was definitely something that caused some conflict for them.
Perfect. So
Yeah,
definitely not the rainbow.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, do you wanna get started with this?
I'm ready. Now that I've seen the statue, I've got some ideas now of what I'm going to be looking at here, or what I'm going to be hearing. So I'm eager to hear if I'm predicting right.
All right. So I don't know how many Bible stories you've heard, but this one is a pretty famous one. So the teaser line that I have for this one is it a test of faith, a tale of obedience, or something else entirely? So with
Mm.
that said, let's get into it.
All right.
All right. So where we are going to be today is going to be in Genesis 22. Do you want the background before or after we get into the story?
Background on what? Like on what Genesis is? Because that would be
Yeah, just
okay.
anything.
That would be nice.
Yeah. So Genesis is the first book of the Hebrew Bible. So the way Christians have it, and I don't like calling it the Old Testament anymore because I feel like it's a little anti Semitic, but the way that the Christians have their Bible split up into is the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so the Old Testament is just the Hebrew Bible. So it's everything that Jewish people would kind of, not everything, but it is a large corpus of the texts that Jewish people would hold sacred. And that is where this story is going to be. Genesis is just the first book of the Hebrew Bible. Um, it comes from a part of the Hebrew Bible that's called the Pentateuch, which just means the five, and it's also referred to as the law. So that's where you get things like Leviticus that tells you don't mix your fabrics, don't eat shellfish, things like that. So this is kind of the part of the Bible that this is coming from. Genesis is more concerned with origin stories, though.
Hmm.
So what we have here, you have Genesis 1 through 11 is kind of Hebrew mythology, maybe is the best way of kind of putting that.
Okay.
Um, it's just kind of a background on how did the world come to be and why are things the way that they are, kind of culminating with this story called the Tower of Babel, where everybody is trying to build a tower up to God, and God says, we can't have that, so I'm going to confuse their language. And that's how we got language, and people spread out. So
All right.
yeah, those are the kind of stories that you would see in early Genesis, where it's just like explanations for why things are the way that they are. Then you start getting into Genesis 12 on through the rest of it, starts talking about the origin of the Israelite people.
Hmm.
Abraham is the person that we're going to be talking about today, and he is seen as kind of like the father of the Israelite nation, and his lineage just kind of passes down and becomes the Israelite people, and that is kind of where we're at. So that's going to be who we're talking about. So I'll give you a brief overview of kind of the three-ish characters that we'll be talking about. There'll be like a few more characters that are related to this story, but not necessarily in it that we can talk about. But Abraham is going to be the first one. So his name means father of many nations, and that's intentional because he's the father of many nations and that. His name was changed from Abraham to Abram, which that just means exalted father. He is the patriarch of the Israelite people, lives in Canaan. He moved there from a place called which we talked about a little bit, is in Mesopotamia, and actually where our ram in the thicket comes from. He is married to Sarah, and they are both really old, and they can't have kids. So,
Okay.
yeah,
They're old in the story or they're old later on?
they're old in this story. So,
Okay.
well, they're old in this story,
Okay.
and they couldn't have kids because they were. Uh, Everybody thought Sarah was barren, and that was like a really big deal in ancient society. Um, and they got super old, and God comes and promises that Sarah's going to have a child, and Sarah laughs at it because she's like, I'm like, I don't remember exactly how old they are, but I think they're in like their 80s or 90s. They're old. So
Too
yeah,
old.
they're old, like not going to have a child old.
Yeah.
Um, and Abraham also has some concubines. Do you know what concubines are? I get mixed up sometimes on what things are in like fantasy and pop culture and what things are just Bible things.
Concubines, it feels it's very like it's a Princess Leia situation, right? But a little bit more sexual.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it is. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Um,
I didn't know how to say it respectfully, but I was like, "Ooh."
yeah, it's not quite a sex slave, but it's kind of a sex slave.
It's
That's
not a sex slave.
Yeah, like they might do some other things. They might serve some other roles, but that like sex slave is a part of their role too. So,
Can we just acknowledge for a second that I was not aware concubines are in the Bible?
mm, yeah, for
That
sure.
seems a little saucier than I expected. I'm
Oh,
gonna be real.
oh yeah. We Well, the Bible is a lot saucier and a lot I don't think I can say this word. A lot more SAE
Oh,
than is yeah. I was gonna say the R word, and I was like, I don't think I can actually say that
I
on
hear you. I
YouTube.
hear
So,
you.
but anyway, so Abraham, one of his concubines that he has, her name is Hagar, and the reason why Hagar is important is because Abraham has a child with her, and his
Mm,
name is Ishmael. And Hagar and Ishmael, right before this story that we're about to read, are kicked out. Abraham sends them out because Hagar and Sarah are having conflict, and Sarah's upset with Hagar and just kind of like, well, you're just the concubine, so
yeah.
you gotta go. And that's what happens. They're just sent out into the desert. And Ishmael actually ends up being the father of the Ishmaelites, and he is actually considered a prophet in Islam.
Mm.
So, and I don't know a ton about either Judaism or Islam, and so I don't know exactly how they view each other, but like their religions are considered Abrahamic religions in addition to Christianity. So they're all kind of considered to have come from similar origins. So Hagar is obviously because Ishmael goes on to father many children and things. Hagar is saved by God. God kind of sets aside a place for her, and she declares God as El Roi, which just means the God who sees me, because God kind of provided for her in her time of need. And then Isaac, so before Hagar is kicked out, Isaac is born. Isaac is Sarah's son. And
Oh,
this is part of the reason why Sarah is kind of off put by Hagar, because Ishmael is technically Abraham's firstborn. So, because of that, Ishmael can kind of have some kind of claim to Abraham's fortunes and
yeah.
things like that. And so, because of that, Sarah, even though during this time Ishmael might have been kind of considered an illegitimate child for the Hebrew people, which I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think Islam would contest that and say that Ishmael, I don't know. Don't quote me on that. I don't actually know. But anyway, so like, I mean, if you've seen Game of Thrones, you know how like bastard children are treated and things like
Yeah.
that. Like,
He'd be like a snow or
yeah,
Sam.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, you know, didn't want Isaac, who was considered like the proper son of Abraham, to have any threats to his inheritance of Abraham's fortunes. And so, because of that, Sarah wants Hagar and Ishmael to be sent away. So that's Abraham. Sarah, who we've talked about, Sarah was really old and she had Isaac, which would have been considered a miracle.
Yeah.
She's the wife of Abraham. So essentially, during that time, what that meant is that your husband made a contract with your father, whereas these other women were just bought from other people, not from their fathers. So that's essentially the difference between wife and concubine at that point.
Yeah, one's like livestock almost.
Yeah, yeah.
Gross.
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we want to talk about how we need to get back to biblical marriage, and this is biblical marriage. So, yeah, no, I don't think we want that. But yeah, another fun point is that the guy that Abraham technically bought her from with the bride price was his own father, because they're siblings. They are half siblings.
S Sarah and Abraham are half siblings?
They're half siblings. Yep.
Surely not.
Oh, they for sure are. And it's not like, in Christian circles they don't make this a big deal, because I remember getting to seminary and there's a story that, oh, actually we can talk about this guy because he's related to the story we're about to go through too. His name's Abimelech, and he was the king of, who knows? I don't know. I don't remember. But he's a king in the area, and basically Abraham's staying in his territory, and he's kind of afraid that Abimelech is going to like kill him and take Sarah from him.
Okay.
And so, because of that, he's like, "Oh, she's my sister," which isn't a lie. It's true.
Yeah.
She is. But he doesn't, he neglects to mention that they're married. And so, Abimelech essentially then wants to take Sarah and sleep with her.
Yeah.
And then God comes to Abimelech in a dream and tells him, "If you do this, I'm going to kill you," because he's actually, uh, Abraham is actually not just her brother, it's also her husband. And so, yeah.
Uh, so hmm, I feel like that Trump meme where he's just like, "What? I didn't know that. I'm just learning that right now." Where I'm trying to. So is the incest glossed over largely, or are there set? There's no. I don't know how to ask this. We might have to cut it. Is there a sect of Christianity that like um doesn't mind incest?
um, I don't think so. I don't think so. Um, Not that I know of. That would probably be much more in the culty realm than like mainstream Christianity. But yeah,
So the
it's
incest is there, we just don't look it in the eye.
yeah, exactly. We
Okay.
definitely don't talk about the incest because I didn't learn that until I got to seminary. I was like, oh,
Wow.
cool, didn't know that. Um, Deeply uncomfortable now.
Yeah, well, you have my attention. So a
Yeah.
large portion of these people are related.
Yeah, for sure. Well, oh. Here's an interesting thing. So you know what the Ark encounter is in Kentucky, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you get like there's like a Noah's Ark, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the guy who does that, his name is Ken Ham, and Ken
Uh-huh.
Ham believes. So there are. This is gonna get really complicated, and I don't know how much of it to share and how much of it to leave out. But basically, there are parts of Christianity where people want to say that Genesis is literal. Everything that is talked about in Genesis is absolutely 100% literal, and you have to believe it's literal in order to be like a true good Christian.
Okay.
So that includes the fact that Adam and Eve were the first two people, and
Okay.
they have children. And who do those children have to have further children with?
Okay.
No one. Their mother.
Okay. Yeah.
their, so yeah, that's
Okay.
and that's
Yeah.
something that Ken Ham will 100% push, and it's crazy. I mean, blows my mind that they would rather go to those lengths to say that the Bible is 100% literal than to just say, well, you know what, maybe there are things we're not accounting for in this, and that it's not supposed to
Yeah.
be a literal history of what's going on.
Yeah, I very much assumed that the Adam and Eve situation was symbolic is the wrong word. Figurative?
Figurative, yeah.
Yeah.
um Mythological.
Yeah.
You know, like it's an origin story, and it's that's kind of what it's supposed to be. It's I don't I think that that part of Christianity, which is actually the part of Christianity that I grew up in, so that was fun. But that is probably a part of Christianity that I think has some hard claims to accept if you're going to be a true Christian. So I
I
guess
hear you.
that is the best way to put it. Um,
That's
anyway,
fair.
yeah. So Isaac is then the son of Sarah and Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
and he likes long hikes up mountains with his father.
Okay.
So, with that being said, we're going to get into the story that we're talking about now.
Okay.
All right. So, this comes from Genesis 2 1 through 19, if anybody wants to go look this up later. After these things, and these things are just referring to, so because we split the Bible up into like chapters and verses and things like that, this was written as like one continuous thing where they would, it's an amalgamation, but they would like write it as one continuous thing in a lot of instances. So these things are just referring to, so Abraham has, so what's happened in the last chapter, Isaac has been born, um, Hagar and Ishmael are sent away, and then Abraham actually makes a covenant, which is we'll talk about covenant in a little bit, but he makes a covenant with Abimelech, the guy that he screwed over earlier, who
Hmm.
he almost got killed. And Abimelech's kind of like, okay, dude, can we like not do this anymore? And
Yeah.
so they make a covenant. Um, so Genesis 22. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. He said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, which who's Ishmael? We don't know Ishmael,
Yeah.
whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering, as on one of the mountains that I shall show you.
He said, turn your kid into an effigy.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, I hear you.
Yep.
For as a show of faith, trust.
Yes, and we'll talk about that, but yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of what this is. It's like a test of faith.
Okay.
So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. And the two of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham
Mm.
said, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." And the two of them walked on together. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. And this is like, whenever it says kill here, it's talking about like ritual sacrifice, like a
Yes.
slaughter. That's it's using the word that they would use to like kill the calves for sacrifice and things like that.
Yeah.
But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Again, like, who's Ishmael? We don't know an
Yeah.
Ishmael.
I don't. I have a lot
And
of thoughts.
and Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horn. So there we go. There's a ram in the thicket.
Okay.
Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son," again for a third time, just reminding us that we don't care about Ishmael. I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies, and by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessings for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So there we go.
I feel as if, and I can't decide who's calling whose bluff, but somebody is bluffing. Is it so is the and I say this I'm truly not intending this to be disrespectful, but if someone told me that story, I would very much feel like um I would feel as if God was calling Abraham's bluff. And that the overall story was like, you just gotta trust God, you gotta let him bluff you. It'll come through. But that's wild that I mean, he was gonna kill his kid.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess technically not his firstborn, but
Yeah, not his firstborn. No. Yeah, because we don't care about Ishmael here. This.
yeah, I like the idea that, God will provide. That's cool. I like that aspect of it,
Mm.
right? Like, I bring you all the way out here, but I don't know if God had to set that up as in, you're going to kill your child when you get there. Could he have not just said, "Hey, head on out. We'll figure it out when you get there."
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Um, I so I think you make a great point about someone calling someone's bluff.
Yeah.
So in the New Testament, which is the Christian thing that the Jews don't um, associate with,
Acknowledge.
I don't know, I don't
Yeah.
follow. So it has a book in it called Hebrews. And in Hebrews, the author, which is kind of believed to be a Jewish author because of their knowledge of Hebrew scripture, um, they kind of contextualize this and kind of say that Abraham believes God because Abraham kind of thinks that God has made this covenant with Abraham, and so God is going to keep that covenant.
Mm.
Um, and it's kind of thought of either through supernatural means, God is going to raise Isaac from the dead,
Okay.
or God's going to provide something else, like in this instant with the ram in the thicket. Um, so that's kind of, I would believe that I haven't seen what's called the Midrash, which is Jewish commentary over these passages. I haven't seen it for this, but I would assume that's probably Jewish thought surrounding this, is that God was going to provide, and Abraham knew God was going to provide.
Yeah, it's interesting when you were reading the story to me and, Isaac says, "Hey, where's the lamb?" And Abraham says it'll be there. In my mind, I was like, no, Abraham is really like, I hate to say pulling the wool over his eyes, but really tricking him to get him out here. But now I wonder if, do you think Abraham believed that his son would die at all? Like, do you think that he was just kind of non-committal about the whole thing? Like, do you think he just was like, I don't know, God will take care of it, I'll figure it out?
It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. Um, I think that Abraham did for sure. I don't think that Abraham's thinking that God is asking him to sacrifice his child. I think that Abraham definitely knows something else is going on.
Yeah.
But I don't know if Abraham's just like, because the author of Hebrews mentions this too, where it's kind of like, or God would fulfill the covenant one way or another. And if
Hmm.
that means it's without Isaac, then that means it's without Isaac. And so I don't know if Abraham is sitting here thinking God's going to deliver Isaac out of this, or
Yeah.
if Abraham's going in with the intention of God said he was going to fulfill this covenant. And so if I have to sacrifice Isaac, I have to sacrifice Isaac. I don't know what his thought process is. And it's kind of concerning to think that it could potentially be the second one.
Yeah, because like when I was in consuming the story the first time, I was like, man, Abraham's not being very kind about this.
Yeah.
He's literally selling his kid, like the price of his child's life. But now I am wondering if this doesn't fall back into like the God has a plan aspect of everything.
Mm,
So
yeah.
maybe not even calling the bluff, more just like blind faith.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Great story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting.
How do
Um,
they pitch it to you guys? Like when you're, because this is a popular kids
oh
one, yeah?
God. Yeah. Yeah. It's for sure a popular kids one. Um, yeah. It's kind of seen. Oh man, which maybe just shows how indoctrinated I really was. It's kind of pitched as this idea of like, see how faithful Abraham was? And because Abraham was faithful, God blessed him so much. So obviously, you should want to follow God as well, because God will bless you if you follow him.
I'm not
And
trying to be a dick. My
go
initial
for it.
thought was, how is God gonna bless you in a situation he put you in?
That's
He
such
told
a good
you to
point.
do it and then like saves you at the last minute is like, I got you, fam, don't worry.
Oh man. Oh, so the story that we're going to look at next week has a similar thing of like God saving somebody from himself, which is kind of funny. But yeah. I think it's important to talk about covenants here, because that is kind of the thing that is not only a central backer of this story and Abraham's story in general, but of really, if you don't understand covenant and you don't understand how it works, then it's really hard to understand the Hebrew Bible, because everything that you see going ranging from the law to even the prophets later on is based on the knowledge of the covenant that God makes. So this covenant is called the Abrahamic covenant, which is basically just saying that the Israelite people will become a strong and numerous nation, and that they will always have God's favor. So that's what this covenant is. And the way that you would, a covenant was like a contract, but it was like a more serious contract. It's like a blood contract.
Okay.
So you would take usually two bulls, some kind of like offering, and you would split them in half and you would put them kind of on two sides of like a little hill, and you would let the blood drain into the middle. And
Okay.
then both parties would walk through, and they would do this to kind of symbolize what has happened to these animals, let it be to me if I break this covenant. So it was
Okay.
like a very
Hmm.
serious thing of like they're invoking in front of God or the gods or whatever, that do to me what has been done to these bulls if I break this covenant. So it's a serious deal. They're
So God made a covenant with Abraham.
yes, yeah.
Other people make covenants to God.
So the people, yes,
Because, like, who
it
enforces
does.
it?
The gods are supposed to enforce it. So
So,
that's
in
kind of the idea.
theory, okay, so, like, if Abraham made a covenant with God, were there other gods in the Bible that would have enforced it if God went back on his word?
No, so that's where it's complicated. I guess essentially what you need to know about this is that Abraham is serving a particular god that's kind of seen in this area as the high god, the God Most High. So that's kind of essentially what you need to know about this.
Have you, okay, does God exist in the Bible in the same way that, and this might be a reference that you don't get, but the same way that Randall Flagg exists in the Stephen King universe?
See, I don't. Oh wait.
Like he's the Dark Man, he's an aspect of Pennywise, I believe. He's a huge part of the Dark Tower.
Yes.
Um, he's like this
Um.
he's this entity that is represented like in different timelines and in different stories, different places, all by different names. But it's the same person.
mm, Within the Bible, not exactly.
Okay.
Um. Yeah. That's kind of complicated. So essentially, God does have several different names in the Bible, but they kind of all like I said earlier with Hagar calling God El Roi, the God who sees me. That's just kind of another name for the same God, but from what I can tell, it seems that they are understanding that they're referencing the same person.
Yeah, like pet names almost, maybe.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, like
Yeah, that
just
makes
different
sense.
names. Okay, yeah. I just it can get really complicated because there's like so many scholarly articles that are written about this that can get really super complicated. And then you can also get into the idea of there's this one scholar that's put forward the idea that God had a wife at some point, and Christians do not like that idea. But he makes a case for it. So
I would love to talk about that some. It's a scholarly article.
yes, it is. Um,
Oh yeah.
and I'll talk about him later on anyway. So I might as well just mention his name. It's Dan McClellan. Um, yeah. So if you if you want to check that out, and he talks about it's Asherah, um, which is mentioned in the Bible, and that's why as an idol, which is why
Hmm.
Christians have a really big problem with it.
Interesting.
I think he wrote a book about it. That might have been his dissertation, actually. I don't remember, but yeah.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about as background was Isaac as the promised child. Um, it's a trope that I mean, we see it today. We still see it in literature today, but it was a common theme in the Hebrew Bible and then transferred into the New Testament as well, seeing Jesus as kind of this promised child as well. So Isaac is in the Hebrew Bible seen as the promised child because he is the son of Abraham and Sarah, and so seen as like the proper heir, according to the Hebrew Bible. Uh, and then we see that in contrast here with Ishmael, who becomes a very prominent figure in Islam as well. And I probably won't say a whole lot more about that because I don't know a whole lot more about that. So,
And Abraham has, I only know it from the song, seven sons?
I don't know. Are you talking about the Father Abraham song?
Mhm.
So it just says many sons.
Oh,
I
just
don't,
kidding.
yeah, I don't remember because he has other children and I don't remember how many they are. And the rest of them, Isaac is the only one with Sarah. The rest
Okay,
of them are from his concubines.
cool.
So,
Good
yeah.
for Abraham.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And so something else that I want to talk about is sacrifice.
Mm,
Sacrifice in both the ancient world and today. So, um, during that time, it's kind of seen as an important uh, way to appease the gods or stay in good graces with the gods, kind of.
yeah.
So if you have some kind of sin you need to atone for, that would probably be the most likely scenario for you needing to make a sacrifice. Um, and human sacrifice is complicated. Um, One, just to know how frequently it actually occurred. Just across the board for anywhere in the world, it's kind of difficult to determine exactly how frequent it really was, and also who was participating in it. And something that Christians will definitely want to push back against, but is possible, if not probable, that the ancient Hebrews probably not across the board, but probably to some extent participated in this practice. And Dan McClellan actually makes an argument for this as well, and actually saying that there are parts of the Bible that you can see that might be condemning this practice that are not condemning it because the outside nations are doing it. So that's something that Dan McClellan is brilliant, and Christians absolutely hate his work.
I was like, so Dan McClellan is hated.
He is. He's actually Mormon.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So he's a Mormon biblical scholar, brilliant guy. But yeah, he's very very hated in Christian circles.
That's interesting to me, right? Because I think there's this idea that pagans do sacrifices. We don't, at least not the ones I am aware of that I spent time with.
No black cats
Um,
or anything.
no black cats, no, no, no. We cookies, right? Sometimes you leave like food offerings and like
Mm.
you know,
So with
the
like Santa
religious
Claus.
yeah, the religious equivalent
Yeah,
of pouring one out for the homies.
yeah.
But is there a modern day equivalent of sacrifice that Christians do?
Um,
Tithing?
Not exactly tithing. Well, maybe. I would say that has largely been replaced both in Christian and Jewish circles with ritualistic practices.
Mhm.
So for Christians, that's sacraments. So do you know what communion is?
I do know what
Okay,
communion is.
great.
Yes,
Yep, because you went to a Catholic wedding, didn't you?
I did. And we have a similar practice.
Okay, I
But
didn't know that.
yep. But it's more about like grounding and connection
Okay,
than, consuming what in theory is the body and blood of Christ.
yes, yes. And Christians will have disagreements about what exactly that means as well. So,
All right.
yeah,
Well, yeah, that's fair.
yeah, yeah. Actually, whenever we talk about theologians, that'll be something that we can get into. But
I know I'm
yeah,
not allowed to do it, but I have always wanted to do
mm.
communion.
it's it is what it is. I mean,
I'm just like, what? I just I want to know what a communion wafer tastes like, and it looks like it tastes like nothing.
it's
Um,
bad. It's not good. Well, it
yeah,
depends.
and I know you can just like
Yeah.
go buy them,
Hmm.
but that doesn't feel. First off, I don't need that many. Also, that feels so rude. To just, I don't know, it just feels super rude.
I know, to just say you can't take it.
Yeah, well, just to go buy them, it feels
Oh,
rude.
oh.
Like if I just walked in and was like, "I'll take 1,000 communion wafers, thank you."
You can
Uh,
maybe like go to the store and like open up the bag and just take one
steal the body of
out.
Christ.
We're not advocating to steal the body of
No.
Christ here.
And isn't only the body of Christ after it's been blessed.
That's that's a Catholic idea. Yeah.
I hope so because I did see on TikTok where someone made an entire communion wafer cake.
That's hilarious. I love
And
that.
it made me uncomfy. I mean, it was very entertaining.
Yes.
But I was just like, isn't that like the body?
Sacrilegious.
I know.
But in Catholic churches, we didn't do this in Protestant churches because we hate people that we won't give communion to. But in Catholic churches, you can actually go up, and if you are not Catholic, you can go up and cross your arms, and the priest will give you a little blessing. So it's
Oh,
nice. Yeah, yeah, it's super
that's fun.
sweet. It's super sweet that they do that. And the we just shame people and tell them you can't take it, you heathen. That's what we do in Protestant circles.
Pagans don't care.
There's
Cookies and honey milk for everybody.
That's great.
Yeah.
We like
We're
it
e
inclusive.
yeah, we're equal opportunity.
Love it. So, with all of this, like, what do you think about this story? Like, are there anything in your background that maybe you have some kind of similar mythological story or something along these lines?
I'm sure that there is, and I was thinking of, but I don't know them because I was thinking about this, and I told you about this earlier this week, and I feel like I'll bring it up on a later episode. My friend's witch book that he hand wrote, and he's extra, so there's lots of chapters in it, and some of them is like a list of the gods and a list of the myths. And I realized that even though I was practicing, I never really learned the lore.
Mm.
So in some ways, in later episodes, I think I'm going to be taking you along with that. And it was my experience when I was participating in religion that the only real take home, the only real story was like, do no harm, but do as you will. Everything you put out in the universe comes back threefold.
Mm. So almost like a karma.
Yeah,
Okay.
a karma. Um, and it's crazy how that sticks around in my head, right? I've had a lot of unfortunate events happen lately, and I remember saying to my partner, like, I haven't even been talking shit, so I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know why my car is breaking down. Um, so yeah, I'm sure there's something similar, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
Mm. Yeah.
I like the story though. I need time to sit with the message
Mm.
because depending upon how I wanted to talk about it, I could see it being I could argue that it is both a good message and a manipulative one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Um, for me, there there are things whenever I first started deconstructing, coming back to this story, just kind of looking at it from the perspective of what kind of God is asking somebody to sacrifice their child. That's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
Um, and just kind of looking at it and thinking, what is the purpose of this story? Is it something that is supposed to be promoting faith or promoting blind obedience?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and depending on how it's used, it could be used either way. And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of the circles that I ran in, blind obedience was more often what was kind of pushed than deep reflection of faith. Because there's another story of this guy named Gideon who does obey God, but he does so after having kind of this contest with God of kind of saying, "Hey, I need you to prove this to me." Okay, well, you did that, but I mean, also I could see how that could just be natural explanation. So I need you to do this for me too, and kind of goes down this list of things, and that Gideon is seen as kind of faithful, but not really in Christian circles. And that's how it kind of feels sometimes to be somebody who's going through deconstruction and asking these questions of, is this a good thing for God to be asking of Abraham?
Yeah.
And people kind of treat you like, well, I mean, what do you need more than that? I'm like, kind of, yeah. I, I don't want to
Yeah.
think that God could ask me to sacrifice my child at any point.
Especially ask you to sacrifice your child knowing that you're gonna pull your punches, like, right? In theory, God asked Abraham and knew that he wasn't going to kill Isaac,
Mm-hmm.
and put Abraham through all of that kind of turmoil, if he felt it. I don't know, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But like, just to know that he wasn't gonna do anything, it feels manipulative is the wrong word, but it definitely that part doesn't feel good with me. And I could see how it would foster this sense of blind obedience.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, do they ever follow up with Isaac?
Yeah, no, Isaac gets for like not from this story. Isaac gets like no closure with this story. He was
That's
just
what that's what I was wondering because Isaac does question at least his father,
yeah.
which if I were going to be like, taking the story not so much as face value, but more in themes, there's probably something to be said about the theme of Isaac questioning his father, but Abraham not questioning God.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but he questions his father, but then lets him bind him up and put him on like the pyre, and then
Well, we
just walks it
assume
off.
that we
That's
don't actually
fair.
know.
That was a short. They wrapped a lot of story into
Oh,
a
they
very
did.
short amount of words.
Yeah.
Um, it's a shame they don't follow. I mean, I don't know why I'm talking about it like it's a series of TV, but I was like, it's a shame they don't follow up with Isaac. I'd
Yeah.
love to know, um, how he processed that experience. Like, do you think he was like, "Whew, I'm super glad, I believed in God."
Yeah. Thank God, literally.
Yeah, yeah. And why didn't Abraham tell him?
That's the other thing that's really interesting that I don't know, I never understood. A somewhat disturbing theme that I've seen in specifically Facebook circles. It's, you know, these older
Mm-hmm.
people who have been Christians for most of their life, if not all of it, who will just blindly start posting things like, if God asked you to sacrifice your child, would you do it? And you get a bunch of people who say, yes, absolutely. Of course I would. I have faith. And like, what? I mean, how about I screenshot this and go show this to your children and see how they feel about it?
That we would have to be, if you said that to me in my office, we would be safety planning. And we'd be having this is just a reminder before you tell me anything else. I am a mandated reporter. Like, we'd be having that talk. Um, it's interesting.
Yep. So I, because if I had felt that way growing up, I think I would have felt very unsafe that around
Yeah.
my family if I knew that at any moment, which my family never said anything like that, which I'm glad they didn't. And if they do think that, I hope they keep those thoughts to themselves. But yeah, because they're not going to be allowed my around my children if those are their
Yeah.
thoughts. Things that you wouldn't necessarily think could be that harmful can actually become incredibly harmful very quickly if you start following some of these things to their logical conclusions.
Yeah, I would say that this is story, we're joking around about it,
Mm,
but if this story were to be told, um, and embodied to somebody that believed it, I could see it
mm-hmm.
being dangerous.
Yep. Well, and
Hmm.
that's what cult leaders like David Koresh take advantage of. People
Yeah.
who genuinely believe it. The people who went and got married to him, and then the husbands who were just okay with their spouses marrying this guy genuinely believed that God had given him some kind of vision and that that was what they were supposed to do, to be good and faithful Christians. So,
I will say this story has really cleared up some things questions I've had just in general about David Koresh is a good example where I've openly said, like, you're trying to tell me this man convinced a bunch of people that God wanted him to sleep with his wives. That's what you're trying to sell me on.
mm-hmm.
No way. No way. Because I only have ever really interacted, with the idea of God in the sense of its like purest, most boiled down stylistic form.
Yep.
I was not aware of the concubines. I am now aware of the concubines. So it makes sense that people would be like, yeah, maybe you should marry my 15-year-old daughter.
Mm-hmm.
It's what God wants.
Yep.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm not Mormon, but I have seen a lot of ex Mormon critique of Mormonism is that Joseph Smith kind of used this idea as well to be able to marry 15-year-old girls and things like that. So,
Yeah.
what do you think is the appeal of this story?
Oh. I think that I think that this story would definitely it's appealing in the sense that it likely validates people who want to have that faith in God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it gives permission to not question.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost said, this is too academic, but this edge of like anti-intellectualism, right? Like don't question,
Mm-hmm.
don't you just follow, um, you do as you're told
Mm-hmm.
and you trust God. Um, but I imagine this is a very soothing story, right? And it allows you to just be comfortable that God's got it. He's in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think something else that I was kind of reflecting on as I was preparing for this is the idea of good faith versus harmful faith.
Mm,
I don't think that having faith is a bad thing, and having faith in some higher power, or having faith that a higher power is protecting you or has some kind of connection to you. I think that that is faith in its most beautiful and raw form. I think where faith becomes harmful is whenever you start putting other people in the mix and you hear somebody say, well, I don't like the fact that I have to beat my child, but the Bible says spare the rod and spoil the child. And so, to be faithful, that's just what I have to do. And I trust that God's ways are better than mine.
yeah,
And whenever it gets into that realm, that is where I start having a problem with faith, because you're impacting other people's lives at that point and
yeah.
causing real and in some ways irreparable harm to people, especially children, whenever you put them in these situations. And I think the other thing,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead if you have something.
No, I was just gonna say I don't think that's something I'd considered, but I mean, Abraham was gonna pay the price of his son, but Isaac was gonna pay the price of like his life.
Yep. Yep.
Um, that's an easy barter to make if you're in Abraham's shoes, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, much easier, especially it's hard to know exactly how different their thoughts were around children during that time. But I mean, in some ways, children are just extra workforce and people to inherit your stuff after you're gone. So I mean, if you see that God's promise to you is that your offspring will be numerous and they will continue into the ages, why do you care whether or not Isaac's gone if you have no emotional
Yeah.
attachment to him?
Yeah, he's
So,
not your firstborn. You've already been deemed the father of the Israelites.
mhm.
How old was Isaac in this story?
It's unclear. It doesn't say.
I like
Let
it,
me
up for
see.
interpretation.
Yeah, it's kind of up for interpretation.
You can really choose how horrific you want to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Yep,
that. Is that by design? Is that
possibly.
a bug or a feature?
Oh, with Christianity, I feel like it's almost always a feature. Oh man, I feel like nothing is a bug. I feel like it's all in by design, but that's probably my cynicism.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I think that this story is one that I feel like it can be a harmful story if you're teaching children this. I don't think it should be a children's story. I don't think that it's a story that we necessarily need to get rid of, but I
Yeah.
don't think it should be a children's story. I heard this story when I was maybe like 3 or 4 years old. And that sticks with you, especially for someone who was a very curious, inquisitive, and skeptical person. Um, Whenever it's drilled into you from a young age that you shouldn't question, you just need to have faith.
Yeah.
That's something that can really just keep you in the system even after you've had years of just going, I don't, something's not quite adding up here.
Yeah. I hadn't considered it until you said it, but in my line of work, that is a very dangerous thing for kids to have. This idea of just blindly trusting those in power. Um, when they're telling the story to children, do they pull punches at all, or is it legitimately the way that you read it to me? Do they say like they're gonna sacrifice him, or do they talk about he's gonna kill him?
It's, at least in my experience, almost always softened.
Mm,
Um, I know we talked about Noah's Ark and how that's a children's story as well. And it's not really a children's story. It's actually really crazy if you think about it that the majority of the world's population was wiped out except for Noah and his family. And that is just kind of glossed over. It's similar with this story.
yeah,
Don't use the word kill.
yeah,
We don't read it straight from the Bible. We always read some kind of summary of it or like a children's Bible where it
yeah.
says Abraham took his son and he was going to sacrifice him, but God stepped in and gave him a ram. And that's
Nice,
kind of all that's really mentioned there. So that's what you get with it.
man. That Ram was just living his life too.
Yep. Well, yeah, with the ram in the thicket picture, I think it's really interesting because I think that there's a connection there with the ram. The ram is not caught in the thicket in that sculpture. It's just reaching up, eating leaves off the tree.
Yeah,
And so that's why it makes me think that possibly in the kind of Mesopotamia, Fertile Crescent area, that was just kind of a common thing that you would see rams doing that, um, because that sculpture actually has nothing to do with this story. It was made either around the time that this story would have said to have been occurred, or even possibly before it.
yeah,
So, yeah, I think it's interesting to think about. That ram's probably just living its life eating eating from the tree and then gets caught in it. It's like, oh, I guess I'm a sacrifice now.
yeah. Well, I'm looking now because I don't remember ever interacting with this imagery as an art history minor.
Mm.
And I'm looking through here and I don't recognize any of these paintings. They exist, not a lot of them. Um, and they don't emphasize the ram. In this one, Isaac cannot be more than 12. And Abraham does look to be about 1,000 years old.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think tradition holds that Isaac was somewhere in his early teens, I believe.
Love this.
Yeah.
Great story. Like I
Yeah.
said, I know I've said it before. That's like I look forward to thinking about this forever now. Um,
Is it gonna live rent free now?
it will live forever. I mean, I've already been thinking about it, but now I'm gonna think about the fact that he was really gonna really
Yeah.
give his kid up.
Yeah, he was gonna do it. So I think just to kind of start closing this out, something that I think relates to people who would find themselves more aligning with what we kind of think and believe. Do you think that questioning faith, because I know for both of us, we have left some form of religion. Do you think that questioning the faith that you are in is in and of itself a form of faith or an act of faith?
That's a good question. I would say it has to be a part of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's hard, right? Because maybe the premise of faith is that it's one-sided.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel as if to be truly faithful, I would need something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would have to question it. I would need, I can't remember who did you say question God?
Gideon.
Gideon. I
Yeah.
feel like I would, I think that is faithful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
What
think
do you,
so too. I think that having faith without any kind of question is not something that really breeds true faith. I think
mm,
it's something that breeds this passive, scared kind of faith. From my perspective, I've seen people who have this kind of faith where they've never questioned anything, and they are always terrified of learning any new information and will shut it down
yeah.
immediately. And if you bring up any new information, like if I if I were to mention the name of Dan McClellan and the fact that he
Yeah.
doesn't agree with everything that the evangelical Protestant church teaches, they would have an aneurysm about it. So
That's so I wonder, I mean, do you think that there's a lack of, I hate to use the word intimacy, but I think I mean it that way. Like when you don't question, you don't get to know God as deeply as clearly.
I would say so.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that people, it makes you afraid to read your own sacred texts for fear of what
Yeah.
you're going to find in there. Um, because you get people like Ken Ham,
Yeah.
that are these hyper biblical literalists that want to believe that not only is everything in the Bible literal, it's also completely and fully factually true, not allegory of any kind. And anything that would challenge that within your own text, you're afraid to read. And you have to find ways to reinterpret it whenever it is brought up. And that's what I find so frequently is just people having to bastardize their own texts in order to and strip it of some really beautiful and great meaning in order to keep this really shallow form of their faith. So
Hmm.
yeah.
I need to think about that more. I need to dig in. I need to play around with that idea because I feel like there's definitely some psychology stuff that is going to relate to that. I have thoughts,
Oh, for sure.
but
Yeah, I think a form of psychology that's really fascinating is people who are looking at religious trauma now. I think it's really
yeah.
fascinating. That's a whole tangent that we could go down.
Yeah,
But
I've never had a client with religious trauma, but
mhm.
I had a friend who was working with an individual who did. And we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole in the literature.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll talk about that sometime. Maybe
Maybe
that'll
you
be one of
can.
my presentations
Yeah,
or episodes.
who knows? I would encourage everyone to go read this for yourself. It's Genesis
Mm.
22, 1 through 19. I think that it's really important to be able to see the text for yourself and be able to actually make sure that I'm not making anything up whenever I'm reading this. If you have any thoughts about this, leave them in the comments and
Mhm.
let us know what you would do if you were put in Abraham's space. If you heard a voice from the heavens telling you to sacrifice your child, what would you do? I really hope the answer is not that you would blindly go do it.
That is, at least in modern society, that would make me upset. I don't know what was
Yes.
going on back then,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
yeah,
All right. Well, yeah, feel free to share your thoughts with us.
perfect. Thanks. If you liked this episode, please consider liking and subscribing if you are on YouTube, or rate and follow the podcast.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you have any questions or would like to suggest a story, please feel free to reach out to us on X or Blue Sky. Until next time, remember that belief isn't the price you pay for being worthy.
And you're not alone in feeling like a misfit.